Hello students, welcome to the WIRE community. This is a segment where we discuss previous year's DILR sets from the GAT papers, and here's one for you today. There is some information given in this particular set, and let's take a look at the set first, and then let's go ahead with the questions. There are questions not just in terms of the questions that follow are not just questions with options. There are a few questions which are type in the answer kind of questions as well. So let's go through the set once and then try and solve it as well. So let's go through the set once and then try and solve it as well. The schematic diagram below shows 12 rectangular houses in a housing complex. House numbers are mentioned in the rectangles representing the houses. If we take a look at the diagram that is provided to us, there are 12 rectangular houses. We have A1, B1, C1, D1, E1, F1, and the same likewise in row 2 as well. All of these are rectangular and they represent houses. There are 2 roads that are serviceable over here as well. The houses are located in 6 columns, that is column A through column F. So we have column A, B, C, D, E, and F, and 2 rows, row 1 and row 2. The houses are divided into 2 blocks, block XX, which is on the left side, and block YY, which is on the right side. The diagram also shows 2 roads, one passing in front of the houses in row 2, that is this road, and another between the 2 blocks. The road adjacent value of a house. The road adjacency value of a house is the number of its sides adjacent to a road. For example, the road adjacency value of C2, F2, and B1 are 2, 1, and 0 respectively. Let's try and understand this particular definition that they have provided to us. So we know that road adjacency. So we know that they're talking about the road adjacency value, and they are basically saying what this value means is the number of its sides adjacent to a road. That's about it for the flats. That's about it for the houses. The road adjacency value of C2 is 2. C2 is over here. C2 is adjacent to this road as well as the perpendicular road. That means the road adjacency value of C2 is 2. Of F2 is 1. Let's take a look at F2. F2 has a single road which is adjacent to it. So that's why the value is 1. F2 has a single road adjacent to it. Therefore, the value of F2's RAV is 1. And for B1, there is no road which is adjacent to B1, which is why the road adjacency value is 0 here. I hope this is clear to everybody. There's another metric given to us, which is the neighbor count. Now, the neighbor count of a house is the number of sides of that house adjacent to occupied houses in the same block. So we're only looking at the number of sides which have adjacent houses that are occupied. So we're only looking at the number of sides adjacent to the occupied houses in the same block, of course. For example, E1 and C1. So let's spot E1. E1 can have a maximum possible neighbor count of 3. E1 can have a maximum possible neighbor count of 3, because E1 can have a neighbor here, can have a neighbor here, and can have a neighbor here. The adjacent walls can be shared with D1, E2, and F1. So we cannot go diagonals and check for neighbors diagonally. It's either horizontal or it is vertical diagonals. It's either horizontal neighbors or vertical neighbors. Likewise, the maximum possible neighbor count of C1 is 2. C1 is over here. How many possible neighbors can be there? I can have B1 as a neighbor. I can have C2 as a neighbor. So the maximum neighbor count of C1 can be 2. That is all that is there initially. And then there is information that follows further as well in the set. So we'll take a look at that on slide 2. The first line is carried forward. So the RAV are the RAVs are for C2 is 2, for F2 it is 1, and for B1 it is 0. This is what was provided in the previous slide as well. The neighbor count, E1 and C1 can have a maximum possible neighbor count of 3 and 2 respectively. So this was also provided in the previous slide. The base price of a vacant house is rupees 10 lakhs if the house does not have a parking space, and rupees 12 lakhs if it does. So for a house without a parking space, the base price is 10 lakhs, of course, for a vacant house. And for a vacant house with parking space, the base price is 12 lakhs. Where are we going to use this is somewhere in the next line. The quoted price in lakhs of rupees of a vacant house is calculated as base price plus 5 times road adjacency value, which we will be finding out in a minute, plus 3 times the neighbor count. So this will give you the entire quoted price of a vacant flat. This is the formula that has been provided itself. There is some additional information that follows as well. The first 2 lines are picked up from the previous slide itself. So we have the RAVs of C2 is 2, of F2 is 1, and of B1 is 0. Let's take a look at each of the flats, and let's write down for each of the houses what their RAVs are. So going by A1, we know that the road adjacency value is the number of roads that are adjacent to a particular flat or to a particular house. For A1, there is no road which is adjacent to the house. That means the RAV for A1 is 0. The RAV for A2, however, there is one road which is adjacent to A2, which is this road, the horizontal road, which means the RAV will be 1. For B1, the RAV will be 0 again because there are no roads adjacent to B1. For B2, the RAV is 1. For C1, the RAV is going to be 1 because there is one road that is adjacent to C1. And for C2, they have already given us the RAV, which is 2. Because this road, the vertical road as well as the horizontal road, is adjacent to C2. Likewise, let's do block YY as well. So we know that the RAV for D1 will be 1. The RAV for D2 will be 2 because the horizontal as well as the vertical road is adjacent to D2. For E1, the RAV will be 0. And for E2, the RAV will be 0. For F1, the RAV will be 0. And for F2, the RAV will be, oh, for E1, the RAV will be 0. For E2, the RAV will be 1 because the horizontal road is adjacent to E2. For F1, there is no adjacent road, so the RAV will be 0. And for F2, the RAV will be 1. Now that we have established the road adjacency values of all the houses, let's go to the next bit. The neighboring count, E1 and C1 can have a maximum possible neighbor count of 3 and 2. So since this is between the maximum and the minimum, we can't really note down definitely what will be the neighboring count so far. So we'll come back to this later. The base price of a vacant house is rupees 10 lakhs if the house does not have a parking space, and rupees 12 lakhs if it does. So without a parking, the base price of a vacant flat is 10 lakhs, and with parking, it is 12 lakhs. The quoted price in lakhs of rupees of a vacant house is calculated as the base price plus 5 multiplied with the road adjacency value plus 3 multiplied with the neighbor count. So all of these variables are coming into picture when we are actually calculating the quoted price of a vacant house. There's further information given to us. Let's go through that as well. The maximum quoted price of a house in block XX is rupees 24 lakhs. The minimum quoted price of a house in block YY is rupees 15 lakhs. And one such house is in column E. So in block YY, the minimum quoted price is 15 lakhs and it belongs to one of the houses in column E. So it's either E1 or it is E2. Row 1 has two occupied houses, one in each block. So row 1 has two occupied houses, one in each block. So there's one in block X in row 1 that is occupied, and there is one in block YY in row 1 that is occupied. So there is one house in block XX in row 1 which is occupied, and there is another which is occupied in row 1 of block YY. Both houses in column E are vacant, so E1 and E2 both are vacant. Each of column D and column F has at least one occupied house. So column D and column F has at least one occupied house, which means it has to have a minimum of one occupied house. It can have both occupied houses as well. There is only one house with parking space in block YY. So there is one house in block YY with parking space. Really? It's okay, but not my concern. Yeah, but vacant हो गया, RAVs हो गया, fine 24 lakhs. Only reduce comes. Let's go back to some of the information and try and locate these particular houses. The first one being the maximum quoted price of a house in block XX is rupees 24 lakhs. Let us see how do we get the 24 lakhs from the formula that they have given us about the quoted price of a vacant house. In order to get 24 lakhs, I know that the base price can either be 10 or 12. So starting with 10, if I take 10, that means a house without a parking space. I need the road adjacency value to be multiplied with 5. So if I take road adjacency values, I can have 0 or 1 or 2. I have to make a 24. So let's see how I can get a 24 from the road adjacency value plus the neighboring count over here. If I have to make a 24 with a 10, that means I have to be sharing if I have to make a 24, I can start off with having the base price as 10 or 12. Let's start with 10. If I take 10 as the base price, then I have to see an RAV value plus the neighboring count when multiplied with 5 and 3 respectively, giving me another 14 to make it a 24. Can I have 10 plus 0 RAV value? If I take 0 RAV value, I'll have to take 3 times something that gives me a 14, which I cannot have. So I cannot have any of A1 and B1 as the price of 24. If I have an RAV of 1, does it work? If I do 5 times 1, that ends up with 15, and then I am left with another 9 to go. So for another 9, I need to make sure that I have 3 neighboring counts as well. This works for RAV 1s. So which of the houses can I consider as 24 if I want the RAV to be 1 and a neighbor count of 3? For RAV 1, I can consider C1, but I cannot have 3 neighbors for C1. I can only have B1 and C2 as neighbors of C1. We have taken a look at what a neighboring count is, right? So the neighbors can only be either horizontal or vertical. That means C1 can have a maximum of 2 neighbors. So this does not work for C1. Is there any other with RAV1? Again, A2 can have only 2 neighbors, either A1 or B2. If I take B2, however, I can have 3 neighbors for B2. I can have A2, B1, and C2, which means this fills in the particular narrative given for the 24 lakhs. This is one possibility that B2 could be the flat, which is priced at rupees 24 lakhs. Is there any other possibility that I can make a 24 with? What if I take an RAV of 2? So if I take 10 plus 5 times 2, it gives me a 22. And then I cannot have anything else that can give me a 24. So the first one is the only possibility if I take 10. That means if I take a flat which is without the parking space. On the other hand, if I start off with a flat with the parking space, then I have 12 as my base price. And then can I build up on this 12 in order to make a 24 again? So if I have 12 here, then in order to make another 12, I cannot have 5s at all. And I'll have to have 3 times 4. Is there any flat that can have 4 neighbors in a situation? There's no flat that can have 4 neighbors. So this is again ruled out. If I take 5, then it becomes a 17. And 17 plus 7 is going to give me a 24. I cannot form a 7 with 3 times something. So there is no possibility of having a parking space flat and priced at 24. That means my only possibility for the flat, that means that means my only possibility for the house which is priced, that means my only possibility for the house which is priced at 24 lakhs would be B2. So I am writing down B1, B2. So I am writing down B2 is priced at 24 lakhs. And clearly, if it is priced at 24 lakhs, it is a vacant house. That means nobody stays in B2 as well. However, we have considered that 24 lakhs is possible only if B2 has 3 neighbors, which means all the 3 neighbors of B2 have to be occupied in that case. Let me fill that up as well. So flat A2 is occupied, flat B1 is occupied, and flat C2 is also occupied. This is clear with the rupees 24 lakhs flat. Let's go to the block YY now and figure out which flat is the 15 lakh flat. This one is a minimum quoted price of the block YY, and one such house is in column E. So they have mentioned that column E has a 15 lakh flat. Let's try and see which one that is going to be. In order to make 15, I can start off with a 10 plus, if I take E1, it will be 5 times 0. And I know that there is one flat in block YY in row 1, which is occupied. That means I can have one neighbor of E1. E2 is also vacant, so I can have 3 times 1. Does this give me a 15? Not really. However, if I change the 10 to 12, that means if I consider E1 to be my flat with a parking spot, then I can make up a 15. That is 12 plus 5 times 0 plus 3 times 1. This is a possibility for E1 being the flat with a parking space and price at 15 lakhs. However, let's consider E2 as well and check. So if I want to make a 15 with E2, can I have a 12 plus a 5 times 1? I cannot make it a 15. In that case, do I have a 10 and a 5 times 1? A 10 and a 5 times 1. This will give me a 15, but I have to make sure that one particular flat, either D1 or F1, is vacant and the other one is occupied, in which case either D2 or F2 has to be occupied as well, because there is at least one in column D which is occupied and at least one in column F which is occupied. So if I take F1 as the occupied spot, then F2 can be occupied or cannot be occupied. But if F1 is occupied, I know that D1 cannot be occupied because there's only one in this row which is occupied. So if F1 is occupied, D1 will be vacant, which means D2 will have to be occupied. If D2 is occupied, E2 already gets a neighbor. So I cannot have 0 neighbors for E2. And which is why E2 cannot be considered as the 15 lakh house. So we have our 15 lakh house from block YY as well, which is going to be E1. And this is considering that there is one particular neighbor of E1. E2 is clearly not occupied. So it's either D1 or F1 that will be a neighbor of E1 as well. And E1 is also the flat which has a parking spot. So this is the one with the parking spot. So this takes care of the fourth condition here, which is there is only one house with parking space in block YY. All the other houses do not have parking spaces. This is clearly mentioned here. This is all the information that we have so far from everything that we have collected here. Let's go and take a look at the questions and maybe come back if we have to. Let's go and take a look at the questions. Okay, wait, I think let's do the whole thing first. Let's glance through the questions once and come back and refill our information. However, the whole thing will go. Can we still fill in more in? Can we still fill in a little bit more in terms of which flats are occupied and which flats are vacant? They have said row 1 has 2 occupied houses, one in each block. We've already got the occupied one in block XX, which is block B1, which is house B1. That means we know that A1 and C1 are vacant flats. So let's write down A1 and C1 to be vacant, which means nobody stays in A1, nobody stays in C1 as well. Likewise, there is one occupied house in block YY in row 1 as well. Now, E1 is vacant. This is something we know of already. So E1 and E2 are vacant. This has been provided as a condition. It's either D1 or F1 that's going to be occupied in row 1. Let's take a look at D1. If D1 is occupied, can we find out what could be the price of D1? This one is without parking because the only house with parking space in YY is E1, which we have already found out. So if D1 is without parking, D1's base price starts with 10, plus it has an RAV of 1, and plus it might have maybe one or more neighbor. The neighbor could be, and plus it has one neighbor. Occupied neighbor could be D2 or it could be 0. And plus it could have either 0 neighbors or 1 neighbor. D2 could either be vacant or could be occupied. So considering that, what is the range of values that D1 could be priced at? So I can either have 3 times 0 or I can have 3 times 1. In which case, my range of D1 goes to 15 or 15 plus 3, which is 18. So this house can be priced at anything between So D1 can be priced at anything between 15 lakhs to 18 lakhs. What about F1? If I have F1 as, if I have F1 who is occupied, on the other hand, if I take F1 to be occupied, let's take a look at how it works. If F1 is occupied, D1 has to be vacant. For F1 to be occupied, what is the price that it can go by? So I start with 10, plus it can have a 5 times 0, plus it can have at most one neighbor or 0 neighbors. So it will be 3 times either 0 or 3 times 1. And the neighbor is F2. Now, if I take a look at this condition, I'll have 10 plus 0 plus either 0 or 10 plus 0 plus 3, which gives me my minimum price for F1 as 13 lakhs, which gives me my range of prices, for F1 to be from 10 lakhs to 13 lakhs. Now, this comes in contradiction with this particular statement, which says, now this range comes in contradiction with the particular statement that says that the minimum quoted price of a house in block YY is 15 lakhs. So that means I cannot have F1 to be I cannot have F1 to be a vacant flat. That means it has to be the occupied one. Because if it is vacant, it will be on sale and the maximum price of F1 can be 13 lakhs, which is contradicting this particular condition. That means F1 is not on sale, which means F1 is definitely occupied, Now, if F1 is occupied, D1 has to be vacant. So let's fill that information in now. So we know F1 is occupied and D1 is vacant. So we have considered condition 2 as complete. We have considered condition 4 as complete as well. Third one says both houses in column E are vacant. Each of column D and column F has at least one occupied house. Now coming to this, if column D has D1 vacant, then it has to have D2 as occupied because it has to have at least one house occupied as a column as well. For column F, it completely depends. F1 is occupied, F2 could either be vacant or could be occupied. We have made sure that E1 has one particular neighbor because E1's 15 was coming in from one neighbor of 3. So F1 is definitely occupied. That means E1 has a neighbor in F1. F2 could be completely left blank right now. It could be either occupied or it could be vacant. Let's now go ahead and take a look at the questions that follow. So we have completed all the information that is given to us. Let's now take a look at each of the questions that follows. Here's question 1 for us. How many houses are vacant in block XX? We know that A1, B2, and C1 are definitely vacant and the other 3 are definitely filled up. That means the answer to this question would be 3, which is A1, B2, and C1. The second question is an interesting question because there was an error in the answer key that was submitted by CAT. The question is, which of the following houses are definitely occupied? Now, there are 2 answers to this, or there are 2 options which are correct in this particular lineup of options. And when there was an objection taken that there are 2 answers to this question, CAT did end up correcting their answer key as well. Now, let's take a look. So we have D2 as option A. D2 is definitely occupied. F2, on the other hand, may or may not be occupied. So we can't be sure that they are definitely occupied. B1 is definitely occupied again, and A1 is not occupied. So we know that there are two answers, D2 and B1. So this was an interesting question that had come from CAT. But in the incident that something like this happens, they will make sure that they have verified and they have rectified their answer key after any objection. But if at all an incident, but in case an incident like this happens, CAT does kind of verify and rectify their answer keys as well if there are any mistakes in their particular sets. Here's question 3 for us. Which of the following options best describes the number of vacant houses in row 2? In row 2, what are the vacant houses that we have? So B2 is definitely there. B2 is definitely vacant in row 2. I also have E2 as a vacant house in row 2. Is there any other house that can be vacant? F2 could be occupied or could be vacant. So F2 is a possibility, but not a short case. That is why my answer would be either 2 or 3. It could be 2 for definitely. Otherwise, it could also be 3. So my answer will be B, either 2 or 3. Question number 4 is this. What is the maximum possible quoted price? Question number 4 is this. What is the maximum possible quoted price in lakhs of rupees for a vacant house in column E? Now, looking at the maximum possible quoted price in lakhs of rupees for a vacant house in column E. E1 already has a 15, which is the minimum price in block YY. However, let's take a look at E2. If at all, I'd consider E2. Now, we know that there was only one parking house available in block YY, which went to E1. That means E2's base price has to start with 10. It also has an RAV of 1, so that will be multiplied with 5, plus 3 times its neighbor count. Now, what can be the neighbor count of E2? I can have both of them occupied, which makes it a maximum of 2 neighbors because E1 is not occupied. E1 is definitely vacant as we know it. So the maximum possible quoted price of E2 could be 10 plus 5 plus 6, which is nothing but 21. And the last question of the set, which house in block YY has parking space? If we take a look at parking space in block YY, we know that E1 is the flat that has parking space available. So that's all for this particular set. I hope you enjoyed the set. It was a little bit of a medium to difficult level set, but it was an interesting one as well. If you wish to follow us, if you wish to keep a track, so we will be releasing, so we do release LR sets every week. If you want to be updated about it, do share. If you want to join us in this journey of solving at previous year's LR sets, then do find. If you wish to join us in this particular pursuit of solving all LR sets of the previous years, the link is in the description. Do go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.